And in order to keep Dave Clennon's respect, I will perfectly ellipse into my reflection by telling you for just a few minutes about an important new book that has been published about an important Supreme Court case. Some of you may have heard of New York Times versus Sullivan. And this new book is called Actual Malice, Civil Rights and Freedom of the Press in New York Times v. Sullivan. I wrote a book review, which is posted at the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I'll bet you Rick may be resourceful enough to find that review and put it in the chat. Very briefly today, in the 1960s, when they were meeting in Washington and before that, Southern segregationists had hit upon a new way to silence civil rights workers and silence the press that was covering it. And that was the use of libel suits. They would bring libel suits against the press. And in this case, the New York Times, that published a full-page ad raising funds for Dr. Martin Luther King's defense and the civil rights movement. By 1964, 3 Southern states had brought 17, that is, officials in those states, had brought 17 libel actions against various newspapers and others, seeking damages of $288 million, which is an astounding $2.9 billion today. These libel suits were very effective in silencing the press. The New York Times was so concerned that they pulled their reporters for over 2 years out of Alabama in their coverage of the civil rights movement. But the Times was strong. It went to court to defend itself, and eventually it got to the United States Supreme Court, where Justice William Brennan gathered a unanimous court to strike down the $500,000 libel judgment, which a public official in Alabama had used to try to silence the press. And it was in that case that Justice Brennan issued one of the strongest defenses of freedom of the press. He said, "Thus we consider this case against the background of a profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, and wide open, and that it may well include vehement, caustic, and sometimes unpleasantly sharp attacks on government and public officials." These libel suits, that's the end of that quote, these libel suits were resurrecting seditious libel. The notion that you could libel the government, that was the charge against John Peter Zenger in 1735. It was the bill of the Alien and Sedition Acts that John Adams signed at the founding of our country. It was the attempted use of the Espionage and Sedition Acts in World War I, which to this day the espionage is used against journalists, leakers, and no one less important than Julian Assange, who wallows in a British prison as we speak. So New York Times against Sullivan, which said that the press could publish widely and without fear as long as they didn't publish something that was knowingly false or in reckless disregard of the truth. But there are forces arrayed to silence the New York Times against Sullivan doctrine, to open the doors again to the weaponizing of libel suits. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has complained about Sullivan, that it allows officials to be smeared and he's proposed a bill that would leave the press open to further lawsuits. On the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Clarence Thomas has suggested that the court reverse New York Times against Sullivan. Gee, why would Clarence Thomas worry about a robust, wide open press covering scandals and corruption in the Supreme Court? And Neil Gorsuch has recommended that Sullivan be revisited. That's at least 2 votes on that court, and who knows what mischief they can cause. So, as I wrap this up, I'm simply calling out to you to be aware of these attacks on the press, be aware of the importance of a case like New York Times against Sullivan. It was an important civil rights case as much as a free press case. And when the decision came down, Dr. King applauded the ruling and said that freedom of the press and speech are so vital to those who are engaged in the struggle for full freedom. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you. Want to introduce Larry Barragan of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, and also the chairperson of the committee that is putting on every year the parade and picnic. We're used to marches and rallies.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Barragan. I'm the chair of the Los Angeles Long Beach Harbor Labor Coalition, focusing mainly on the port unions of Los Angeles and Long Beach harbors. I come out of the oil sector, 33-year member of the oil sector of the United Steelworkers, formerly the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union. Been a member for over 33 years. Held various positions in union leadership through the years in that union. Then ventured off into joining other committees and organizations within the labor movement for the last, say, 15 or more years. And I currently hold the position for the last 8 years as chair. And one of the main events that we organize is the LA Long Beach Harbor Labor Coalition Solidarity Parade. It's celebrated every Labor Day. And it's one of the largest Labor Day events west of the Mississippi. And we're proud of that we do host the largest Labor Day parade west of the Mississippi on the West Coast. And mostly proud that the fact that it's 100% union organized and union supported. It's a nonprofit group. We raise all the funds for the event, all through labor. We don't take any donations from corporations or elected officials, anything like that. Everything is sponsored and supported by labor. And it's one of the largest events in Los Angeles on Labor Day, and if not, probably the premier event for Labor Day in Los Angeles area in Southern California. Anyways, I come from a background of union membership since the migration of my grandparents coming from Mexico. My paternal grandfathers were immigrants that came during the early 1900s. During the First World War, seek employment. I guess you would say that American dream. During that time, the times were tough. The Great Depression hit. They were raising children, doing whatever they could to survive. And they landed in Los Angeles here in the port of San Pedro. And my grandfathers were actually worked in the shipyards. One of my grandfathers worked 50 years in a shipyard and was a proud member of the Shipbuilders Union Local 5 division of the ILW, International Longshoremen Warehousemen's Union. And my other grandfather was a ship scaler, Local 56 of the ILW. At the time, ILW still is one of the most powerful unions on the West Coast. And they retired, became American citizens, raised families, and they retired with their pensions and Social Security, and working those good labor union jobs helped them achieve the American dream. my father's a product of that. He's first generation American, Mexican American. He too tried to pursue a career or a job in the shipyard, but my grandfather forbid it. And yeah, my father joined the Marine Corps at the end of World War II. And then when he got out of the Marine Corps, he actually took advantage of the American GI and went to college, got his degree, came out, and was successful as a controller, as an accountant in a company, local company, and retired out of there. And then I had two older brothers who are members of unions who just recently retired. My oldest brother had 42 years in the building and construction trades, just recently retired. And then my other brother has 30 plus years in the waterfront at the International Longshoremen Warehousemen's Union, Local 94. So I come from a long history of union background, dating back to my grandparents. My grandmother was a community activist in San Pedro and a member of the Cannery Workers Union, highly respected for many years, well known in the political scene and the Democratic clubs, the Latino Democratic clubs in San Pedro and Los Angeles back in the 50s and 60s, and was instrumental in organizing neighborhoods to get medical and dental programs going for the people who were underprivileged, who did not have access to that. So I kind of took after my grandmother as an activist. Well, she was quite a fireball of her time. And till the day she died, she was very, very active. I'm pretty proud of that. My family history and a combination of me and my brothers all together, we have over 110 years of union membership, us three all together. So, and I'm about 5 years away from retirement, so I still have work to do. The other two brothers kind of sit back and watch what I do, but they're instrumental in being very, very positive with their union membership and promoting that in my family household, which led me to join the union. And hopefully somebody will follow in my footsteps in my family, but I'm working on that right now. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but it seems like yesterday. My first rally, my first march, my first picket. Seems like yesterday. Now time flies. I just turned 60 years old, and I think I still have about another 20 years to go. This fight. I don't know what I'm going to do once I retire. I'm not going to give it up. I'm still going to be active and involved, as many of you are. So, and I thank for what you guys do. I'm listening to what you just spoke about earlier, and it was amazing. What your organization does. I didn't know too much about it, but I did some research, and it's really amazing what you guys do, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Talk about the strikes that are going on now, or the strikes that are being considered. We're all interested in this upheaval of labor that we're seeing today, and also starting with that.
Well, yeah, there's a large direction going forward with organizing this country. For decades, we've seen the lack of organizing or successful organizing in the membership of labor unions has dropped to around 8 to 10% of the workforce. At one point, we were 28 to 30% historically. Now we're seeing a big change. And the reason is that inflation is catching up. It's surpassed. It's hard to work and live off of minimum wage. The rents are high, mortgages are high, the lack of access to medical insurance, pension, retirement. We have a new generation of young workers who are looking at their future, and they're not tolerating it anymore. Nobody's tolerating it anymore. We have this automation coming in, or the artificial intelligence. Screen Actors Guild and the writers are striking over all that. In the port, we have a lot of automation being installed on the cranes. Longshoremen are fighting that fight. actually trying to install automated crane systems in the port, which they already done at 2 of the terminals down there, which would take about 250 men and women to unload or load a ship. They can do it with automated cranes, and they'll lose about 150 jobs a day. So everything's automated. And that's where the fight's at a lot, the automation. And Detroit was the first city that suffered the automation back in the 70s when they introduced robotics. Everybody thought that was great, but the workers felt it. And now you see what the city of Detroit's going through, a lot of disparity. There's a lot of bankruptcy going on. The real estate market's is gone. A lot of homelessness. Automation and robotics do not pay taxes. You know, they don't go to the market and spend their money. They don't go to the local church and donate. It doesn't work that way. So what happens is the communities fall into despair, and there's no more workers. And then the wages drop. People trying to live off of $16 an hour here in Los Angeles. It's just impossible to pay rent, let alone eat, feed your family. That's why the labor movement's moving forward, and more workplaces are being organized, such as Starbucks and Amazon. You're seeing a lot of that all over the nation. And then, fortunately, we do have a labor-friendly president in the White House for the first time in decades, and which is a huge plus and a huge factor in all this, because he's trying to change the labor laws where every time we try to organize something in the workplace, it gets challenged in the courts. And these laws that have been instituted by the Republican right wing through the years to bust labor unions, drop wages, and cut benefits, they need to be reversed. And they're slowly being reversed in a lot of cases. But then a lot of cases in the big sectors of such as Amazon and Starbucks, where they have the big money and they push off the campaigns as long as they can, with the hopes of change in the White House and change in Congress and the Senate and the laws, so they can go back to substandard wages, lack of benefits, etc. But we're seeing more and more of the union organizing successfully. You know, many Starbucks across the nations have won successfully votes in the workplaces to go union. And the Teamsters recently, and the UPS, 380,000 members nationwide, successfully got a really good contract for the first time in decades, with large wage increases, pension increases, a lot of health and safety language in their contracts, where 380,000 members ratified that agreement recently, which could have shut down part of this country. So people are standing up. All the unions are standing up. Screen Actors Guild, the longshoremen, the oil workers. You've seen the Teamsters with the UPS contract recently. We're on the verge of what they call a general strike, shut this whole country down, and which I think maybe we might see one day soon, to hold this country at a standstill so the working class can make, they can make something happen in this country for the positive. And maybe that'll be an answer to some of our homeless situations, where people can get access to good paying jobs so they don't have to live on the street. There's people living from paycheck to paycheck that are union members, believe it or not, because they have substandard contracts, because through the years, industries chopped away at language, or they come crying broke. We can't give you raises, or we have to cut pensions. I've heard a lot of that. I've negotiated many contracts where we were threatened with bankruptcy, closure, which follows by layoff. So we take concessions through the years and never regain them. The companies start getting profitable, and then the labor force starts getting cut. And you'll never make that back up, no matter what. Even though they say they got a 10 or 20% raise, and coming from the teachers' unions, you all know how that works. When you don't get your raises, or your contract has not been negotiated and you're at a standstill for a number of years, and then they finally give in to an 8 to 10% raise, which doesn't make up for all the years you didn't have your raises. I mean, Carol, I'm sure you experienced that through your years as a union member, walking the picket lines through the years. I believe in that, what was the early 70s and 80s, they had two LA Unified School District strikes. How many strikes did you
Yeah,
go
I
through?
was a one, but it was the 89. I walked the line in 89.
Yes.
I was a chapter chair of my school, and lo and behold, we're on strike. And it was really an exhilarating experience to see people who have never, my coworkers, I worked in lots, never been active in any kind of political or social struggle, being out there and having almost 100% of us out there on the line.
It sure changed
I
everybody's.
am going to exercise my, pardon?
It
I'm
did.
going to exercise my prerogative as a facilitator by asking one more question, and then
Sure.
Gerald, Fernando, and Sophia have their hands up.
Okay.
And that is, could you give us a sense? You talked about, Larry, a possibility of a general strike. Could you talk about the history, particularly in the area where the harbor area, of shutting down port, shutting down business as labor unions? What is our history that looks like we might get into a general strike in the future, in the near future?
Well, yes, there's, in the 1930s, there was a general strike, especially out here on the West Coast, which was the foundation of the forming of the International Longshoremen Warehousemen's Union, ILWU, which was founded by Harry Bridges. Harry Bridges was from Australia. He worked in the ships. He was a seaman, a mariner who landed on the West Coast, and in the 1930s was instrumental in organizing the ILWU, which at that time, in order for a man to, or not even women at the time, but just men, to work on the docks to unload a ship, you had to report every morning in the hopes of getting picked for a day's work. Old Harry didn't tolerate that. So he slowly organized the ILWU and organized a general strike in which all the shipping companies came to a standstill, railroad, dock workers, which slowed all the commerce on the West Coast to a complete halt, which panicked the government because at that time they were building a lot of ships up and down the West Coast for military. So military ships stopped being built, the railroad stopped working, all the food and perishables that come in and out of the ports just came to a complete halt. Unfortunately, police and the military were called in, forced people to try to go back to work, and it caused the lives of several people that day, in 1934, here in San Pedro. There was a brutal murder of two union organizers by the Los Angeles Police Department. At that time, everything came to a halt, and history changed. They successfully negotiated a contract for the very first time. People became union members, but it just showed that this country, that it could be done. As you recall, earlier in the year, the railroad workers were in negotiations on the verge of strike. Unfortunately, the White House intervened and kind of forced the contract on the railroad workers, which a lot of them are not really happy with, for sick time and more vacation time, etc. But a general strike is in the air. I hear through a lot of union members and a lot of union council meetings where it could possibly happen again. We just tested the waters right now with the Teamsters contract, the railroad contract, the West Coast ILWU contract. Can you imagine if the railroad, the shipping industry, and UPS was to go on strike all at once? It completely would stop this country altogether. But unfortunately, it will probably cause inflation, high gas prices, and people won't be able to get their goods. And that's what happens when you have a general strike. But you make a voice, like it's happening right now in Hollywood. Hollywood's at a complete shutdown right now. And history might repeat itself. I really hope it does. It could make a change. It could make a huge change if we were to do that. UTLA, when the strike on the verge of UTLA, really good contract recently. They didn't want to shut the schools down again. They didn't want to see what happened in '89 repeat itself. Fortunately, they got a new superintendent. He worked with the union and successfully they got a contract. Recently, the LAPD just ratified a new contract. Now, could you imagine the school, UTLA, LAPD, and the fire department, which negotiate a contract at the same time, basically in the same year, to shut the whole city of Los Angeles down? It would be a state of emergency. But they would really make a point. It would really make a difference, just like during the time Cesar Chavez, when they had the great workers' strike. That was a big fight. Unfortunately, at the time, Ronald Reagan, or so-called former president of the Screen Actors Guild, and supposedly a strong union man, busted that all up. That's part of old history. But I can see a general strike taking place if things don't go in a positive direction because of inflation, substandard wages, lack of medical, and a lack of pension. Defined benefit pensions are a thing of the past. When you get into an employment now, it's a 401k, and they say, here's some money, you invest it. Could you imagine you have a bunch of 22-year-old or millennials trying to invest their future in a 401k? Could you imagine that? Fortunately, I do have a defined benefit pension that's pretty healthy right now. So when I retire, I will have a pension. But my son or daughter, they don't have one. They have a 401k, but they're responsible for investing in that for their future, which they're not in the stock market. They're not traders. It's not easy to do. And it could be a failure in the future. We're going to have a whole group of retirees in the next 30 years that won't have much to live off of, because if the stock market takes a dip like we saw in 2009, they can lose their whole retirement savings the year before they retire and continue to have to work till they're 75 or 80 years old. So fight for good pensions. It's very important.
Yeah. So Gerald, you have a question. And could everybody else please mute yourself?
Yes. It sounds a bit like some of what you're saying. I put down union versus technology. I don't think anyone wants to stop technology. Its benefits are outstanding. However, yes, change is just, this world is, it's all it does is change. Second question has to do with, union versus capitalism. We are in a capitalist society, and I don't think America is even willing to think about that in terms of some of the changes that need to take place to make this society work a little better. Actually, more so, I think most of America needs is just some integrity. It doesn't have that. Finally, you mentioned homelessness. I used to feed the homeless a lot. And actually, I brought up my children to do that through our church for many, many years. And I don't see that much as an economic issue at all. Personally, I see it as a mental issue. Right now, mental health is getting a great deal more attention, at least on the billboards and in the newspapers and the media. And I think that's a bigger issue with regard to the homeless problem. Anyway, that's just a comment, but I'm done.
To get back to the technology, I see your point in that. But the problem with technology these days is very competitive. So what happens is this. Say, for instance, what took place in Detroit with the automation of robotics that were building cars. Okay, industry thought that was the greatest thing. The unions didn't like it because they started losing jobs. America was intrigued with the automation and the technology. But what happens is technology gets very competitive. So next thing you know, China has a better technology in building cars, or they started implementing building cars, Japan. And next thing you know, those automated devices go overseas and start building our goods. You see it right now with the microprocessor chips. We're competing with China and we're trying to get those microprocessor chips here in the United States, but they make a better product because they became very competitive. So that's the problem with the technology, is that it gets very competitive with China, Japan, foreign countries, and what we need it. I totally agree. If we don't stay in tune with the technology, we're going to get surpassed by China and all these other countries, and I agree with that. Now, as far as the capitalism, everybody wants to be a capitalist and make money. I totally understand that, and people believe that the trickle down economic effect is the way to go, and that doesn't work, because you got the rich, then you got the poor, and the labor movement is trying to keep the middle class alive, which is diminishing slowly. So there has to be some form of control on the capitalists, because what I mean by that is they're getting major tax breaks, they're getting major tax cuts, but there's no trickle down effect. And then when it comes down to the homelessness, you see the mentals, and totally agree with that. But you got to understand, I've known several people who had great jobs. They lost their jobs. They fall into despair. They get divorced. They get hooked on a drug. They lose everything. They end up on the street. The mental illness kicks in. They have no way of medical insurance to deal with the mental illness. And so they end up in the street. So a lot of those people have mental illness and are drug habits. Is that an economic thing? It can be, but it does need medical attention. But if you don't have access to a medical plan, and everybody depends on medical plan to be provided by their employer, but you could lose your job and you have no medical plan the next day. I think free Medicare or free medical for everybody, aside from that Obama plan. But if we had universal health care, I think we'll see a lot of less of that stuff on the street. People would be actually taken care of on the medical side with their mental illness.
Yeah, thank you. I remember when I was with the United Farm Workers, which was my first political activity, Cesar Chavez was talking about mechanization. And he said, there's some the slogan came out, mechanization should benefit everybody, not just the farm owners. And he was talking about the fact that there are some parts of farm work that should be mechanized because they're backbreaking. That concept of spreading the benefits of mechanization. For instance, if we had shorter workday for everybody with the same amount of pay altogether, in other words, squeezing the rich instead of the workers, that let's say we had a 4-day work week instead of a 5-day work week with the same pay. Anyway, we have Fernando, Sophia, and Rick with their hands up. So, Fernando.
Hello. Anyhow, I'm glad that you are here. I mean, we really need more a union member like yourself, you know. But I guess my question is, historically, when you look at the history of the union here in the U.S., during the 30s, you have a large portion of population member of the union and so forth. And many of these MAPERS also created here in the U.S. by in Chicago. When they have some kind of educational that they exploit, these children, working in the factory and so forth. And, it basically, they have a big fire in Chicago, and many of these children also perish and so forth. But I guess my question is that from then on, like I said, you have at least maybe I'm not quite sure about this. Maybe 35% of the people were a member of the union, and now you have maybe less than 5% belongs to the union. And I guess my question is, what happened here in the U.S.? Maybe there's some problem within the union leadership and so forth for you, if possible. If you can answer it, it's fine. Thank you.
No, yeah, it was a lot of the labor laws have changed. We've seen a large change when from the 80s up to the 70s. There was a large union membership in this country. From, like you were correct, 30 to 35% of the workforce in this nation was organized by labor unions. We're down to about anywhere from 9 to 10% currently. We lost a lot of work, and a lot of those jobs shutting down. Factories that are, first of all, that went automated, technology. We lost a huge part of that. We lost a lot of jobs due to environmental. Every time we get a different environmental laws, such as, say, the coal industry shutting down the coal mines, factories, steel in certain sectors of the country, we lost a lot of jobs to that. We lost a lot of farm work, believe it or not, to Mexico. We lost a lot of different industries through the years. And then laws have changed to make it harder to organize labor unions in the workplace, especially the public sector, the government sector jobs, which now are being challenged in the legal system, the right to organize or right to join or not join a union. And a lot of it has to do with union leadership. What happens is, through the years, a lot of the union leadership was very comfortable. They thought, hey, we're here, we're invincible. They became professional politicians in the union game, unfortunately, but the whole time things are starting to collapse behind them. There's a new generation of union leadership now, very positive in the positive direction, but a lot of it was lost to technology, environmental issues, and so forth like that. And then, of course, labor laws that were against the labor unions. If you all remember when Ronald Reagan fired 5,000 members of PATCO, air traffic controllers, in 1980-81. In a flip of a switch, there was 5,000 people lost their jobs overnight. Things like that continue through the decades. So,
maybe just follow-up question. Do you think capitalism with a heart is well, I guess I reverse it a little bit, but do you think the capitalism is the problem here in the U.S.? Because it seems you're closing down many shops and so forth, and they transfer jobs from China and other developing countries, but at the same time we are suffering with that, and whether we like it or not, that is the reality of what we face with this so-called American capitalism and so forth.
No, you're correct. You're absolutely correct. You got a lot of the American capitalists who they look down at the profits, and if they can make it cheaper and more profitable overseas, they'll do it. Absolutely.
Good morning, Larry. Thank you so much for all you've done for labor. This past weekend, I went to the e-board for the Democratic Party, and I was in there trying to strike language and find balance to protect labor and the environment. And I was hoping that labor could have a stronger voice when it comes to CARB regulations. I organized down at the port a few years ago, and we shut it down. And I understand when you have to not strike because it can impact us. But Caterpillar and Cummins, are at the table and they're controlling the regulations for every machine that we got to build.
Right.
It's not based on science because they'll say, we're going to change emission standards, but all these mega machines, I mean, it's choking, it's choking the budget because machines are still green and they decertify them. So I think that's important because when they decertify them and they could still perform 50 years, but they decertify them every 12 years, it's not about at all protecting the carbon footprint. It's about selling more machines, more equipment, because Caterpillar wants to make money.
Absolutely.
So the other thing is we really need labor to raise their voice because these multinational corporations and the Democratic Party is in control of all this. They are giving grants, all those grants, to do the upgrades to corporations outside of California. So that also hurt us financially because every month, if you would have gotten that for whatever reason, for whatever machinery or equipment, you would have made monthly deposits into our banks, which then a portion of that goes to small business. This is happening labor, and I put it as part of the platform to demand that the AQMD and that CARB give those grants, to do the upgrade because they're not giving enough time period to do a changeover. There's no infrastructure to say because we're fighting AI to transition, and there is no workforce housing. Affordable housing is privatization, and so I was pushing forward public housing because we don't have it; it doesn't exist, and that would boost labor. But we need the federal government to come in and do public in a more contemporary way, whether it's apartments or condos, because these new covenants where they've just extended it to 55 years, you're going to be they're kicking out our future generations. They're not looking at, that 55 years from now will be thrown out of that apartment or whatever is built, that affordable housing unit. And then your children, you're mortgaging your grandchildren's future by saying yes to this affordable housing. It's a mess. And we do need a national strike because as you were talking about the numbers about those that are in labor, if labor doesn't step up now to do this national strike, to bring attention, to have workforce housing, to stop what Caterpillar is doing and Cummins is doing, because that's bad for the environment, what's going to happen in the future? We're not going to have one. We're just going to have more, wage slaves. So I want to thank you for everything you do, but I was in there trying to strike this language, and the Environmental Caucus misrepresented themselves because I went to the Labor Caucus and I talked to them, and they talked to you. No, they didn't. So I had to make sure that I was in that platform committee and submitting paperwork, doing the work to find a balance. But right now, what I saw in Visalia this weekend was very disturbing because it would impact labor, and of course, communities of color would be most impacted. And there are jobs for people, and you need $30 at least to make it in LA. We're being pressed out. We're already out. Plus, we have over 30,000 evictions that are coming down. We're at a standstill, and we can't do it without labor. So I know the parade's coming. I hope you speak to it if you can, and I thank you for all your years of work.
Thank you. And you hit it around the head. I totally agree with what you said. It's a farce. I mean, like the Port of Los Angeles, Long Beach, you know how that we went green. Labor was right behind it, make sure everything went green, but in the right way, in the right direction. You get these lobbyists from these, like you said, Cummins and Caterpillar. They're right there in CARB's ear and AQMD's ear and all them, just like you said, decertifying a piece of equipment so they can just make profits every 12 years. It's a farce. It's a joke. All that. It's amazing. It's like right now, they give them tax breaks. They give the oil industry tax breaks if they produce what they call renewable diesel. That's the latest thing now. Renewable diesel. You get a tax break. Renewable diesel. All you need to do is put a certain mixture in a tank of diesel, and they get a tax break, and it's no different than it was the week before. It's this whole thing is a hustle. But like you said, they're pricing LA's getting priced out. The home I live in that I purchased 25 years ago, if I wanted to walk in right now and purchase this home, I could never afford it. And I make a six-figure income because it's I don't know, first time buyers, you don't even hear that anymore. You never hear a first time buyer. Hey, I worked that part of the American dream of saving money for a home. I did that. I was fortunate, but I don't know how my children are going to do it. Buying a 900 or $1.2 million home that's only 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,800 square foot in Long Beach in middle class neighborhood. $1.2 million home. When I was a kid, you lived high up in the hill, or you lived in Beverly Hills or Hollywood. It's amazing. And then you got these, like you said, these apartments they're building in for low income. Read the fine print. Eventually, it's all going to be for profit. There's no more public housing. They're trying to get rid of those. It's amazing. But sister, you hit it around the head. And labor does need to step up. Labor needs to speak up, because that's the only defense we have left in this country for the working men and women is the labor movement. We're the last frontier. We're the last voice. If we're gone, they'll have full control, and it's going to be rich, the 3%, and then the rest of us are going to be struggling. And it will be spoken at the Labor Day event. I do have labor leaders that will speak on that point.
Larry, thank you very much for this talk. And it gives a perspective, and there's a long range historical perspective that we tend to forget about, right? And I wanted to pick up on a couple points. One of them was Fernando talking about how capitalism is the genesis of a lot of the labor issues, right? And I think I want to put a little bit finer point on it, because in Europe, labor unions in a lot of countries tend to be stronger, tend to be work with the government a little bit better, and cost of living has not gone up in certain countries as much as it has in the United States. The problem isn't capitalism, it's predatory capitalism that we have here. And, when you have what's essentially Mussolini talked about it, fascism is the connection between the government and corporations. That's what we have. Right. So, and the whole model that we're looking at is something that has a history. It has a history of running amok. And, we need to fight as vehemently against it as corporations are in keeping the status quo and making their footprint bigger. Right. So I like the idea of a general strike. I also think that, essentially domestic, the disturbance of the financial and domestic environment is something we really need to take a look at. If hundreds of thousands of people 1 week set their W-2 to zero deductions, that says something. It says we don't want to pay our taxes anymore, and we don't want it to go to, for your use in a way that's harming the general public. That kind of thing can be very important, but we don't have the intestinal fortitude to do it. And other union people and other working people in other countries do. So it's up to us. I did want to ask you one thing, because my dad was a union member. He's 99. He retired as a Teamster. He's still getting benefits. He's still, he's still sharp. He was kind of looking at the Dodger game a couple nights ago and trying to get pitching changes going. But he was a union member all his life, and he supported other unions. Everybody in our neighborhood was, supported the UFW when they went on strike. When the teachers went on strike in 79 and I was a senior, we didn't go to school for a few days to support the teachers, right? So, but I ended up working in the music industry and music retail. So I would work for record labels, I worked for Virgin Megastores. All of those are non-union jobs. What do you think is the best way for someone who is not currently working in the union to be able to support the efforts of union workers, union officials in helping to make a change for workers overall?
That's a good question. Well, are you talking about possibly organizing the workplace, or just being a non-union member to support your community, your labor community?
I think those are two different things. When I was working at Virgin, there was no possibility of unionizing the workplace.
Right.
We talked about it. I would have been replaced easily.
Right.
So, but I think is it something like somebody joining the IWW or something like that? In other words, are there ways that a person that is not in a union right now, is there a way to help them give voice to somebody who is with a union or with a group like the coalition that you're working with? In order to help advance what you guys are trying to do?
Well, your organization right here is a very good example. You're not a union member. Carol's a retired union member. Fernando's previous union member. There's a little bit of mix and match in your organization, but you guys are here interviewing me, right?
Yeah, that's true.
For me, and you guys are behind affordable housing, and you guys are all for you were raised in a union household.
Yeah.
And you just spoke about when you were a kid how your dad supported other unions and specifically in your neighborhood, right? But the neighbor went on strike.
Yeah.
Your family supported that, right? Because your father was a union member. Your household was union, basically, because your father was union. There's a lot of organizations such as this one, yourself, and other organizations that support labor, but a lot of them are not affiliated with the union, or they're not union members. Like there's organization for universal health care.
Yeah.
It's a mixed group of union members, retirees, non-union members, community activists supporting that cause. That everybody can use universal health care. And it's pushed by the labor unions, but it's also supported by groups such as this one. So yeah, that's the way that labor can be supported. You don't have to be necessarily a union member to support labor.
Right. Yeah.
I get it all the time. I met a young man the other night at one of my meetings. He's a Teamster organizer, fairly new one. He's been in the Teamster organization. Started with UPS as a UPS worker, and then he worked his way into the union as a union organizer. And he told me he was excited to meet me and be part of our planning meeting for this Labor Day event, because he told me when he was a kid, he lived near the parade route, and he would watch the Labor Day parade and admire all the labor members, union members, march in solidarity. He would follow the parade on the sidewalk all the way down to Banning Park, where we have this massive picnic and rally. And he would walk around that rally. And he said, someday I'm going to be a union member. I'm going to be part of this. And he goes, I always wanted to have a union job. He said, I got my job right out of high school with UPS loading trucks. Then he worked his way up. This guy's in his late 20s. And now he's a union organizer, member of the Teamsters Union for 9 years. And he said, I used to walk around and watch everybody celebrate Labor Day. And I would just be by myself in the crowd, watching the entertainment, listening to the speakers and all the labor leaders get the crowd going. And I would say to myself, I'm going to be part of this one day. That's my goal. I want to be a union member. And he came to one of the first Labor Day planning meetings, and he was so excited. And he's looking forward to Labor Day because it's going to be his first Labor Day where he was actually involved in planning it, because he's part of our planning committee. And it's amazing. It made me feel really good, is the fact that he was a kid and he pursued what he wanted to. His dream was to be a union member, and now he's a union organizer for the Teamsters, which is, to him, he can't believe it. He says he lives in a dream. He loves his job. He loves what he does for people, and he goes into workplaces and help organize and get people really good paying jobs. So I think it's pretty awesome. But back to your question, organizations like this is a big support for the labor movement.
So moving on to Ruby and then Jasmine. Excuse Steve, and then Ruby and then Jasmine.
Thanks, Larry. We're so grateful you're with us today. I have kind of a two-part question. I know you're based in Long Beach, but in LA, I understand 100,000 hotel workers and hospitality workers and others are on strike, not to mention the Writers Guild and the Actors Guild. If you're able to give us a little update on what, in the case of the hotel workers, what issues they're striking over, where the justice lays in their demands. And then related to that is this whole question of going back to basics. People are suggesting that strikes cause harm to the general public, that strikes are selfish on the part of labor. They cause great damage. Those are the kinds of arguments that have been used against labor unions for decades. So if you update us on LA and the issues there, and if you can speak to the heart of calling for a general strike and how you balance the impact of that strike on the general public versus the interest of labor, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. In regards to the hotel workers striking in Los Angeles, one of the main issues are wages, because a lot of those hotel workers, they work in the service sector of the hotel. They're the ones who clean the rooms, janitors, they clean common areas, the people who cook the food in the kitchens and serve the food. They're the service sector of the hotel industry. They can't afford to live in Los Angeles. Many of them commute as far as Riverside because it's more affordable outside in different counties. They want a livable wage. Then they want access to retirement. There's no retirement system within that. A lot of them are cut hours, like say, for instance, instead of hitting the 40-hour work week, they're only working 32 hours or maybe 30 hours intentionally so they don't have to qualify for any kind of medical or pension plan. So they want to change the language for that purpose. They want some better working conditions, believe it or not, because a lot of times, say, for instance, a hotel worker who cleans a room, after you check out, the linens must be changed, the bathrooms must be disinfected. Well, sometimes they're assigned 15 to 20 plus rooms in an 8-hour period. Just one person to go in there and do all that. They want better language that would actually cut their workload down so it wouldn't be so strenuous on one person to clean so many rooms. In other words, they need more staffing. That's on the hotel worker side. There's only one hotel that actually negotiated a successful contract, and that's the Bonaventure Hotel in Los Angeles. They're the ones who actually so far has negotiated the contract. I believe it's been ratified for that group. I don't know too much of the details in that particular contract, but they settled. The others won't follow in at this time. Now, as far as the screen actors and the writers, I don't know too many details because that has a lot to do with technology and for instance, the pay that a screenwriter will get for writing something that comes out on TV. In the past, it comes out with what you call repeats or in syndication and so forth. That screenwriter will get residuals for a long period of time. But now we have these new streaming services like Netflix and all these different streaming services you get online with these new technology of TVs. That's the sticking point where the language and how they get paid plays out. I believe somebody from the Screen Actor Guild, SAG, is online here. Maybe they can fill us in on the details currently, because I know those negotiations are coming to a standstill constantly.
Dave Klein actually had to leave this meeting to go be on the picket line.
That's right. That's right. As far as the question of unions, people get afraid of the word strike. At times it's necessary, only for the fact that that's the only large chip at the bargaining table for a union is the strike. There is language in contracts that bar striking during the contract period. In other words, if you have a successful contract for 3 to 4 years, there's language that bars the group from striking for those 3 to 4 years. The only time they're allowed to strike is when the contract comes to the end and they're negotiating for the new contract, is when they're the access to strike, which there's a lot of legalities behind striking. People just think, well, you just can walk off the job and hold a sign in your hand. There's a lot of legalities these days in order to strike. You have to do it in a certain way. It's got to be legal. It's got to be, because it's going to be challenged in court. So the union has to make certain precautions before they strike. Okay, there's attorneys get involved to make sure that they play that card right, because ultimately you don't want to go on strike and the next thing the company fires everybody and they're out of work. So it's got to be done right. Secondly, does it put a damper on the community? It can, but ultimately they're doing it for the community. Okay, there's a lot of communities that, say for instance, here in the Port of Los Angeles and the surrounding communities, such as San Pedro, Wilmington, Torrance area, and the adjacent city, Long Beach, they welcome union members. If you go to San Pedro and you go to a business or restaurant, you'll see signs that support labor. You'll see signs that say, we support the ILWU, or we support the United Steelworkers. In their place of business, you'll see that. Everywhere you go, you see lawn signs, people supporting the union. You haven't seen that in decades, but the last 5 years, we've been seeing more and more of that. But a lot of people will support that effort. I've seen where groups have gone on strike and community leaders, community at large will come and support those people. Where landlords will say, you're on strike, we'll hold your rent back until you're back on your feet. The AFL-CIO has a program where if I go on strike, they will send a team of people to my union hall. They'll tell me to bring my bills, bring your mortgage paperwork, bring your debts, anything you have. They will actually sit down, contact my mortgage lender and say, look, this guy's on strike. You need to work with him. Because the last thing that the bank wants to do is me foreclosing my house. They'll work with me. All my creditors, bank cards, they'll make an easy payment plan for me. And then ultimately give me assistance on paying my light bill, my gas bill, my water bill, and then ultimately get me groceries for my family. So before we go on strike, everything has to be planned out legally and to make sure that we're self-sufficient and we can maintain while we go on strike. A lot of times the well runs dry and things get tough, but these days the labor movement is highly, highly supported by the community. I see more and more of that. In 33 years, I've seen the last 5 years, I've seen more and more of it ever than the last previous 30 years. Community is really supporting labor these days because we spend money. They know that small business owner, that money's going to stay in that community. Now, technology or robot, an automated piece of equipment doesn't spend money in the community. They don't go to church and donate. They don't pay taxes. They don't buy homes. So with all of that, you got a good paying jobs in the community. That community makes money.
Wow. Yes, Ruby, then Jasmine, then Lenore.
Yes. Thank you this morning for all that you've expressed. You brought back memories, especially when you talked about your grandmother, and she's been probably my age right now. You're in your 60s. And I look at and thought about where I was in unions. And my family was union regarding railroad and other things. So when I came out of school, I worked for Max Factory Products in the lipstick line. And then I was in Local 770 with Safeway and then with Boys Market. And so I understand what you're saying about unions, but what's happening to me with now, everybody forgot about me and that I did pay union dues for 20 years. So I'm working with this right now in my retirement. So thank you for this. When I became, after my accident and everything, and decided to head to the pulpit, it wasn't to be a minister pulpit, but it's to work with the people, because this is what I felt. I remember one of the things, working together with people in the lines. I loved it, so that we could work together. And so all the things that you're saying here now in the retirement is going in a different way, coming together for the future. So I just wanted to mention that.
Great, thank you.
And you're talking to a union person who's also was a grandmother and family was union people. And we're talking about, I guess, 40s and 50s.
And your family made a very good livable wage.
Yes, they did. This was in Colorado. And then my mother came to California. And so this was basically in Colorado that they worked. And it was union.
Was it the mines there? What kind of work did they do?
Oh my gosh. No, not mines. Well, my family was like with food products.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay.
And then also they were railroad. You know,
Okay.
most of them were really railroad. And like, so you had the porters.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's what I remember. And then when I left in the 50s and everything and came to California before I went to, they were with the service, you know, with the Air Force.
Okay.
Part of my family I went with. So I was kind of like what you call an army brat before I came here, and went straight into thinking, no, you're supposed to be at a place with the union. And that was when I went with Max Factors when I was, I guess you would say, 19, coming out. And so here I am now in my 80s saying, what happened to my union dues? And they're saying, well, we don't know you know, so I'm going over with that now. And trying to find out, okay, I do have this money coming in that I did pay in retirement. Where did it go? And that was in the 70s, 60s, 70s. So that's it.
Well, thank you for your history.
And what Jill was saying too regarding capitalism, that's important.
Mm. Lenore?
This is not a question, it's just an add-on to what's already been said about the Unite Local 11 strike. I've been marching, picketing, walking with the workers as a supporter from the beginning. And when they talk about their workload, it isn't just lowering the number of beds to fix a day. It's every other day they were told to clean. They want daily cleaning so that the load isn't doubled, and that's very troublesome. The other thing, I went to their rally at the Bonaventure before the strike, and they want hotels not to enforce e-verify on immigration, which now some are using as a threat. And they also want to remove the record of incarceration. So they have a long list of demands. Housing, I see, is the most important, and they want some help, subsidy for the housing. And I've met so many that work way out of the city. One worker in an airport hotel lives in Temecula. So that's a huge issue. So this is not a question. Thank you for your work. And we can all be supporters, even though we're not union members. Thank you.
Well, thank you for supporting. Thank you very much.
Right. That's great. I believe, Maggie, your hand's up. You're muted.
Yeah, when I retired from my job, I wanted to continue my membership with the union. It was local 721, SEIU 721. And I couldn't get anybody to accept my union dues so I could continue being a retired member. But when I went around there, they were talking about, at some point, talking about supporting the Democratic candidate. And this was before even the primary between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And they supported Hillary Clinton before I don't think there was a vote. How do they decide which candidate they're going to support for the presidency?
Well, a lot of unions have different structures. A lot of them have what they call political action committees or PAC committees. A lot of those committees are formed by a representative from each local union within the international union, and they meet and they caucus about whoever their political choice might be, take it back to their union halls, present it to the union membership for a vote. But every union has a different process for that. I know it was a bad choice for unions to that last go around. They should have went with Bernie 100%. But yeah, I know it's frustrating. I get frustrated with that system too. Totally understand that. Totally. There's a lot of unions though, even though they, say for instance in the SEIU, that's usually handled like on the international level, in some unions. But you'd be surprised, a lot of the local unions of those international unions will actually split off and endorse the opposite candidate because they believe it would affect their sector or their chapter in their district. I've seen a lot. I see it within a lot of the Teamsters, SEIU, a lot of the big unions. They will actually have a local split off and say, we hear what you're saying, we hear your recommendation, but our membership votes this way, and we're going to endorse Bernie. That happened a lot during that Bernie-Hillary campaign. A lot of unions were divided amongst themselves in their own international union, which way they were going to go. A lot of the local unions went to Bernie, and a lot of the other local unions within that international union endorsed Hillary. So you've seen a lot of large unions split in half over that whole thing. And then what did we end up with? Trump.
Yep.
Bad.
I am really blown away. I see Vivian Price here.
Hey, Vivian.
I don't see Vivian, but I see her name here.
My old friend
I'm here.
How you doing,
Vivian?
Very good, very good. Good to see old friends or friends who I've known for a long time, and really happy to hear about this presentation today. Thank you so much. Carol Francis and Larry. So my question is about climate change, and as a way that communities and labor can find mutual interests. I mean, this goes back a long way. Larry, we've talked about this a long time, and you've had some very positive things to say about this.
How did I know you were going to bring this question up?
But it does cause some friction.
It does.
And it's important for us to push for really clear plans for job placement and for a bridge towards retirement, etc.
Right.
So here's my question to you. There is a bill, the Displaced Oil and Gas Workers Bill, that was passed in Sacramento over a year ago, and it puts aside $40 million to create funds to help workers who are being displaced from oil and gas as refineries, et cetera, shut down. So, but nothing has happened. And how do you think community can help? Because people don't know about this bill. So I'll let you answer. Thank you.
Good question. You know what? Yeah, you're right. Nothing has happened. Particularly in my union. I know they've been meeting and discussing, and you know what? I really don't know how to answer that question, Vivian, because that's the hard one. I mean, if my union doesn't even have an answer, I don't even know how to answer that one. But they do need to join together. Something needs to be done because it's happening quick. I see it. I'm still on this working in that sector, and I see the mass changes taking place so fast. And I worry about it because refineries are making plans to shut down. They're already plugging wells. Shell Oil capped all their wells in California. They're making their move. Phillips oil companies are evaluating their refineries for shutdown. I see all this stuff that's happening, and it's happening quick. And then I don't see that $40 million where it's going, but something needs to be done. I wish I had the answer for that one. Frustrates me.
The guidelines, they have not released the guidelines for the grant project. And I mean, it seems like if we could publicize this, we could try to get our council people or assembly people to put a little bit more fire under the EDD and the workforce development to get these guidelines out.
I actually think that's not enough money. I think that's just a drop in the bucket, personally.
Absolutely.
Just a drop.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, when I find out, Vivian, I'll let you know personally because I want to know stuff. Unfortunately, I don't attend those caucus meetings that my union has been meeting up north regularly the past year since that all took place. But I'm not privy to those meetings, but I wish I was.
Vivian, that may be an issue that ICUJP should take up as a Friday morning forum. I didn't know anything about that, and I think that's very important. Talk to me about it. Don't be a stranger.
And how we should vote for that. Yes, we do need information.
Right. Wow, we can actually see Jasmine. I see the people who still have hands up have spoken, and I want to make sure that I get in one last question, and that is, how can ICUJP and the Long Beach Los Angeles Harbor Area Labor Coalition work together in the future? For one, how do we get our members, ICUJP, out to the parade and rally? I'm going to be with my UTLA brothers and sisters. How about the rest of us? They very likely will be with the SAG-AFTRA contingent. And connected to that, what does the Long Beach LA Harbor Labor Coalition do for the rest of the year, and how can we work together? Maybe we've talked about a screening of movies like Salt of the Earth or 10,000 Men Named George, which is all about A. Philip Randolph. So how do we work together, ICUJP and the labor coalition in the future?
Now, we are a coalition of unions that promotes positive solidarity. It was originally formed to settle disagreements amongst labor unions for jurisdictional issues that were amongst in the port area. Many years ago, 40 plus years ago, which then evolved into doing this parade back in the 80s to support the oil workers when they were on strike. And then Jimmy Carter and his administration was forcing them back to work because as president, he didn't want to see the gasoline prices go up. So he forced the oil workers to go back to strike, thus breaking the negotiations. And that was the very first year of the parade in solidarity. Now it's a huge event. But to support what I recommend is, like I said, I'm trying to promote that our unions who are involved open the doors for organizations like this one, open the doors for them to the environmental community. They open the doors to the local community, to the churches, to the schools, to the parents associations, all of that. Lend your union halls for meetings. Lend your union halls for screenings, for special movies like you just spoke of. That's what, as a labor leader, that's what I try to enforce. Open those doors up. Let, like this organization, have a screening of a movie for the community. It doesn't have to be a union thing. It could be a community event or an environmental caucus where we can talk about the environmental issues in the area. Open the doors up. It's how can we support you? It's not as so much as how you can support us, but how can we support you? That's the question.
All right. I just want to say that's where I got my ILWU bracelet that I wear every day.
That's right.
And it says, an injury to one is an injury to all. ILWU. Got it at the picnic, I believe, last year.
I want to thank Carol Francis for facilitating today. I want to thank our colleague for that extraordinary reflection that we had at the beginning of the program. But I really want to thank Larry. Larry, you are now a card-carrying member of Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. I love your notion of opening union halls for meetings. ICUJP has often held events, screening. We are going to take you up on that offer and work with you behind the scenes. I also think you made the case that unions have been important to American society, that it is not selfish for people to organize, to have a better wage, to have a better working conditions, that creates a middle class of people who can support each other in their communities. If you have to look at it from a commercial standpoint, be taxpayers, be fruitful, and enhance American society. I think unions did that in their heyday, and they can do it again, especially if they have leaders like you. We were very impressed today, Larry, and we're so grateful. And look how you could take your time on a Friday when in barely a week you've got a major program coming up on Labor Day. So thank you for being with us. I'll turn it back to Carol Francis.
Good, because I want to say one more thing. When I reached out to the Long Beach, LA Harbor Area Labor Coalition to get us a speaker for today for the upcoming Labor Day, Larry's response was, I talked to all these people about being speakers and they're working at 7:30 on Friday mornings. So he volunteered to reorganize his own schedule so he could speak with us today. So thank you, Larry, for that.
Oh, it was my honor. It was my pleasure. Believe me, it was good to speak to you all. I appreciate you inviting me for this. I really do.
We will be in contact with you because we do want to work with you in the future.
Thank you again, Carol Francis. Rick, what do we have in store next week?
Great.
We have somebody that I think you know.
Yes. Just to jump in, my cousin is a Baptist minister who left the Southern Baptist Conference and is prepared to give us a real look into the takeover of the Southern Baptist Conference by really right wing forces. And I'm very grateful that Craig Lascauzo will join us next week. I think it will be a very interesting program, and I hope you all will join us.
And thank you for your reflection too. It was a beautiful reflection.
Okay, you're back, Ruby. Thank you for your closing. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. Support our event on September 10 and enjoy your weekends.